All right, welcome back to the Sink and Swim podcast. This is actually our first episode with two guests at one time, and it's going to be a really deliciously juicy one. I'm so excited about this one. We've got Katherine Hill, who's a physician, and Megan Hellner, who's a registered dietitian with AthleteMD, a somewhat newish startup multidisciplinary practice, which we'll tell you all about. And I'm so excited to invite them to this episode because of my own background working with athletes of all ages and stages and genders who are very, very active and driven, and sometimes moving into the category of struggling with relative energy deficiency in sport, which is their lane. And that is literally what their practice is built around. And I'm so glad to see that out in the world. So needed. And, I've worked with clinicians. I coach now a lot of clinicians, women in healthcare who work with those types of athletes or are those types of athletes themselves. And also jumping into the perimenopause stage of life or, postpartum and pregnancy, and where there's so many changing things happening in your body, but you want to stay active and all that stuff. So we've got lots of juicy stuff to talk about the crossroads of all those things that happen. So welcome, Megan and Katherine. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit, walk me through, how did you two find each other and decide to build something together? We'll start with Katherine answering that question.
So Megan and I met really at our last job. We joined an early stage startup, and she was nutrition director, I was medical director, and we just really hit it off. We had very similar interests. We both sort of came to work in the eating disorder space because of our own experience as athletes and because we were very passionate about working with active people, in particular athletes, and we just kind of bonded over that mutual passion. And it happened that we then transitioned away from our last role at the same time, and we had a conversation. And I think we're also at very similar life stages with our families and our children. And it just felt right. It felt like there was a big need that needed to be filled in this space and this niche, that we had the right backgrounds to kind of combine and go out there and help these folks that are struggling with REDS, or relative energy deficiency in sport, and or eating disorders, or just general sports nutrition needs.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that the niche is that you're mentioning relative energy deficiency in sport, or as you said, eating disorders. I love how you said or, and it's not necessarily both. It can be both, but I think that the niche is so interesting because, especially Megan, you might see this, especially as a dietitian, like, people with relative energy deficiency in sport may not have an outright eating disorder, or they may not be meaning to underfuel or eat improperly, as we might say. And I think it's so interesting to actually build something almost centered around the athlete and sport and like how they function in that.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on like being in that niche versus you guys were previously in like an eating disorders clinic, right?
Yeah. I think this kind of goes also into why we wanted to start this and to work together in this space. We had both of us spent a number of years or even a couple of decades in different levels of care, different eating disorder programs that were not athlete centric at all. And I think just speaking for myself, I started to feel like we could be serving athletes a little bit better. I was never really fully satisfied with what the athlete programming was feeling like. And understandably, there are other priorities in that kind of environment. And similarly, disordered eating and REDS are often handled really quite poorly in sports circles. Not always, but often. And so to be able to kind of like bring this together and really do it right, it was important to both of us. Yeah.
Amazing. And you guys said something, Katherine, you said about like your lives, like where you were in your lives. This was really good timing. So I'm curious from each of you. We'll start with you, Katherine, on like what was going on in your life that made this really good timing for you.
Yeah. And it's something I think I've come to appreciate more and more as I've gotten further into my career, that your career has to fit in with your life, right? What maybe used to fit no longer fits, right? And so I think it's often important to realize that about yourself. This just feels like the next right step for where we are in our lives. And a few reasons. One, and first of all, I'll start by saying I never thought I would do a startup or found a practice. I mean, I'm trained as a pediatrician, and by and large, there aren't pediatricians out there in private practice doing their own thing, right? This was not on my radar. But because of the last startup that Megan and I had an opportunity to work with, really caught the bug of, you know what? Maybe we can go out there and do something a little bit new, a little bit different, and a little bit niche that really combines all of our passions together and why we ended up in this field in the first place. I'll also say that, for life reasons, I'm a mom. I have 3 young kids, a husband who does a lot of travel for work. He runs his own startup. And so I needed personally to be more in charge of my schedule, and while also feeling like I'm contributing to the world and helping all those patients out there that really need this specific care. So yeah, it's kind of a combination of lots of factors, but it has just felt, I know Meg and I talk about this regularly, it just has felt so right to be partnering together on this new adventure that we're on.
Yeah, the balance of, well, I love what you said first about your career needs to fit your life instead of the other way around, which I think in healthcare, in the health and wellness space, we're kind of trained, make your life fit your career. And when you're young, you can make that happen and you don't have kids, you don't have all these obligations. And then they start to pile on, right? And you're like, whoa, this isn't going to work at all. It's particularly difficult on mothers and women, I think, but that's amazing that you felt that nudge. What about you, Megan? How was it perfect for you?
Gosh, I mean, in so many ways, I felt like this was kind of the culmination of everything I had learned throughout my last 20 or so years of working in this field. And I was able to really use it here, which is just something that's always been very gratifying to me, to work not only at like the top of my clinical license, but just at the top of my capabilities, just across the board. And also, I was always drawn to working with Katherine. I think we had not only similar interests, but just worked really well together. So the idea of doing this with her, whereas I was in a solo practice, for many years, and that was super cool, but also a little bit isolating, was just made it feel really right and exciting and like it was worth doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And I
love
have small
this.
kids too. So having the autonomy to kind of be off when I need to be off and then be on the rest of the time has been really just, also, it's just kind of the cherry on top.
Yeah, it's such a nice secondary side effect. Like, I feel like I can really feel and sense the mission as sort of the primary reason. And then, of course, it's like, well, once you have the mission down, building the practice around that mission, and then being like, oh, look, I can customize my schedule, or we can really hone our services to meet these exact multiple needs that, or in these holes in the system that we weren't seeing met, which
Yes.
is so beautiful.
Yeah.
I think
Edifying. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of us here, and I know probably all your listeners as well, are mostly ambitious women, right? Who are constantly trying to do it all or have it all. And that looks very different at different stages of life, I think. But this feels like as close as one can get to that, even though I don't think it's fully possible to have it all. This feels as close as we can get.
Yes.
Yeah. Katherine, I obviously know your sports background, but I'll tell our listeners. So you were a swimmer. We grew up swimming together in Atlanta, and you went on to swim at Stanford. And obviously, I think you went through all the medical training through Stanford, correct? And then, Megan, were you also an athlete? Do you have an athletic background?
Yep, I was a swimmer as well, although not collegiately. Once I came down to Southern California for undergrad, I was swimming masters, but not swimming for San Diego State, and just continued to, athletics and just being active, they've always been kind of a tonic for so many different things in my life, and such a source of like joy and relief. And so, yeah, I think Katherine had a much longer swimming career than I did, but we do have that in common.
Yeah. Yeah, all 3 of us, I guess. That's amazing. Do either of you still stay active, do any type of swimming or sport or physical activity that you enjoy?
Yeah, I think we both do. I'll let Megan share in a bit. But I recently started playing tennis.
Ooh.
Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, which has been so fun because it's a new skill for me. I'd never had a background in tennis. And what's great is I can still get better as an adult. I don't swim very much at all anymore unless it's like a perfect summer day. There was a grown-up summer league now that I did a couple 25 races, just for fun. But that's kind of the extent of my swimming these days. And, I've also got kids who keep me running around.
Right.
They're outdoors riding bikes and I'm chasing after them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. The unmeasurable physical activity, but it's very much there. Yeah. Megan, how about you?
Similarly, I do kind of love to stay active. And that's another kind of great piece of our jobs, and the flexibility is being able to, while the kids are at school, go out and move my body a little bit. But I do still swim, usually just for about kind of under an hour recreationally, and love yoga, love hot yoga, believe it or not, at least some of the time, and weight training and hiking and things like that, and just anything we can do together as a family. I always enjoy. I was running quite a bit up until about 10 years ago. And then I had some like overuse issues with my hips that took me out of the game. So yeah, low impact.
Yeah. Oh, I understand that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also understand the swimming for less than an hour. And it's
Yes.
so nice you can choose that now. Right.
Yeah. And it still feels impactful in a lot of ways and just feels really good to get in and out of the water. Yeah.
Really does. I always feel like when I get in the water, it's like, oh, I'm home. This is home. What a great feeling. And I was just thinking about the way that you, especially Katherine, what you were saying about like, women, ambitious women were sort of wired, and cultured to try and have it all. And I feel like almost like what you're building with your practice is very much sort of like the training plan, of an athlete. Like you kind of make it all work and it's got to fit their life and it's got to fit their desires and their family and all of their really unique specific needs. And it's never going to be perfect, but it's like you kind of get that athlete mentality as an entrepreneur as well. And that's really, really nice and beautiful. And what a great way to tap into that. Speaking of, what's also really cool about the athlete mentality is you guys are a team, and swimming is a team sport for the most part, even though it's quite individual. And I'm curious, in the spirit of team, Megan, we'll start with you. What is it that each of you brings to the team that the other one doesn't? Not just, obviously your different skill sets and expertise, but also like the softer things.
Gosh, can I speak to some of the strengths that Katherine brings?
Yeah,
That's
for sure.
easier for me to come up with is just some of my deficiencies in soft skills. First of all, Catherine's not afraid to like put herself out there on social media and tell stories and connect with people, which is just something that, it takes all of the brain energy I have to put together like a social media post, an artist thing that I do. Um, the writing style and just all of that. Yet I do really enjoy teaching and giving information and shaping professionals and things of that nature. I think just how we go about it is quite different. And I think both of us, I'd say one shared quality is that we definitely feel passionate about giving care that is excellent. Not really sacrificing that for anything, for growth or scaling or profit. And that's nice because I think it grounds both of us and keeps us really on the same page, which is a good feeling. Yeah. Gosh, other soft skills. That's hard for me to, I suppose, detail oriented, but I would say Katherine is also very detail oriented. So yeah. Yeah.
It's nice to have two people who are, because it's like if you're having a little bit of, you just don't see something, someone else sees it and you can bounce that off each other really well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally also get the balance of the person who like is totally cool with social media and then you're like, that is exhausting for me. Yeah, I feel like it's not for everyone. It's not. And that's beautiful. But you love teaching and you love, guiding other people. And I love what you said about providing truly excellent care and letting that be the value instead of chasing profits and scaling, because there's a lot of pressure to do that, especially as you grow and people start to buy in and get more interested. It can be so tempting, especially with that driven, ambitious personality that Katherine mentioned. It's like, yeah, why don't we just do more? But it sounds like you've got a really like strong value driven principle there to give excellent care. And I would guess also, and Katherine, maybe you can speak to this too, that like back to that, you're not sacrificing your life to grow this.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Early on, we talked about, should we go and pitch this to venture capitalists and raise money? And we decided not to. We decided, you know what? We should be our own bosses. We should call all the shots here. And it just feels so good to not have to answer to anyone. I think that was something we did think about, but I'm really glad that we are doing this on our own and we're growing this slowly, intentionally. And like Megan said, we're really trying to prioritize excellent quality of care as sort of our star. And I guess you were asking about working together and why we work together well as a team. And I mean, obviously we have different fields, with Megan coming from the nutrition side, me coming from the medical side. And just the nature of the patients we care for really often need both. Not always. Sometimes somebody is a medical provider, and so they just see Megan and vice versa. But we find that the multidisciplinary care team really is the best way to care for patients with REDS, patients with eating disorders, or both. So it's just been, I guess going back to our athlete days, it's been way more fun to be on a team for multiple disciplines than to be out there on my own, doing this on my own, Yeah. And with that said, I also, it's funny because I don't feel comfortable with social media. I do it because I want to try to combat all the bad nutrition advice people are getting out there, but it's not something I ever thought I would be doing or, I still feel not very comfortable with it, but I think it's I'm working towards and something that I think is important for getting reputable advice out there and growing a business, etc.
Yeah. Combating bad nutrition advice. I feel like that's an entire profession in itself, like people who are really masterful at that, and so it can be really intimidating when people, will quickly follow or subscribe online, like a hot take or some type of plan that's like, pay $49 and get, this whatever thing to be an amazing athlete, and it's like, wait, hold on. Sounds good on paper, but probably isn't that great for athletes. So I love just again, like you said, the North Star of true excellence, leading the way and doubling down on not, just choosing. There's such power in that choice of, what, we're not gonna take the carrot that is become this massive scaled thing. And if that means you don't reach the masses, that's great, but you're going to reach the people who truly meet your niche, right? And your skill set and your expertise. So I'm curious, speaking of like bad nutrition advice and who are these people? Megan, we'll start with you. Like if you were to describe sort of the ideal athlete or athletes, like different ages, different stages, what really lights you up in terms of the type of person that you love to work with?
Yes. I'll say, I mean, first, we aren't generally the best fit just in terms of our approach with someone who's seeking GLPs and weight loss at any cost.
Oh, yeah.
For example, that'd be one example. We do still see that in the athlete world, but I think one population that Katherine and I are seeing a lot of it, we both really, really enjoy and get excited about are adolescents or teenagers with ARFID, which is an eating disorder diagnosis described as like very picky or selective eating, who might have had the diagnosis for years dating back to childhood, but now that they are training harder and they have these goals of getting stronger and becoming a well-developed athlete, they're ready to have a go at this again and try and do the work. Again, even though they might have been very tired of treatment or resistant to it in the past, those cases are really fun. And I think what we find is that we can improve their markers of health and athleticism at the same time. Those two aren't and never have felt like competing interests where we're renourishing them at the expense of their athletic potential. I think those two things typically pair together. So what's good for long-term health is good for athleticism for the most part. So I think someone who's coming in also with that mindset of wanting to get stronger and better now, but also have some longevity in their sport, those folks tend to be just philosophically a really good fit for us. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I love your line. What's good for overall health is good for athleticism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like
yeah,
it seems like it's common sense. However, I feel like almost like going back to there was this hole in the market, right? Or in both the medical and nutrition world that you guys are filling, it's like there's sort of this, okay, you can do well as an athlete, but that might mean that you're sacrificing things for your overall health. Or you can be really, really healthy, but that means you might be sacrificing things as an athlete. And I love how you said they aren't mutually exclusive. It's like you should have both almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
As time goes on, I see fewer and fewer and fewer examples of those two things being mutually exclusive, and just feel even more confident saying, like, if we make these adjustments or make these changes that will improve your well-being long term, it will also improve your athletic performance. And there's literature to support that too across a number of different domains. So that's been, it also just makes me feel like we can practice in a way that's very like intentional and considering not only the person's next couple of years and their season of life as a young athlete, but also decades down the line, just supporting them and being athletic into their older decades if that's what they want. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That really resonates with me. That's what got me interested in working with young athletes in the first place, was to set them up for success moving forward. Because I was seeing, anyone from 6 to 21 as a physical therapist, and just seeing like, oh, wow, okay, not just for physical movement, but that, I was very interested in REDS as well and did a lot of clinical research there and was like, wow, there's so many downstream things that happen from this age. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, Katherine, pediatrics. Like that's just like everything is all about setting people up for success. But I love what you said about that in terms of it's not just for now, we're looking ahead at how we can set them up for success. Katherine, what would you add in terms of ideal patient population, clients, athletes that you love to work with?
Yeah, I mean, our initial cohort of patients has just been so fun to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I would say a lot of our patients that both of us see, and Megan can see all ages. I tend to see up through the later 20s, but because I'm trained, not much. But I think our typical patient is a high school or collegiate athlete who has REDS and or an eating disorder. Most of them are coming from your endurance sports, your running, cross-country running, or marathoning, swimming. I mean, we see, and we really have a range of sports. I mean, we've had roller derby, darts, golf, and right. So there's really, I don't want to narrow relation we see, because we really do see anybody in this age bracket, and they don't even have to identify as athlete. We also get a number of patients who are not athletes who find us through the eating disorder world. Patients from people we know in that space too. So we really don't. We want to be able to be an open space, open practice for really anybody who has a struggle with eating in some way, athlete, non-athlete, and I'm focusing on more of the younger ages. But I know Megan also has her population of perimenopause.
Yeah.
There.
That's great. Yeah, I love what you said. It's like, it doesn't have to necessarily be someone who identifies as an athlete, which sometimes just the psychology of being someone who works with athletes helps you work with people who are still driven or still ambitious, but maybe a musician or it's super, coding geek, whatever, or just an average young adult, teen, anything like that. So beautiful. Okay. I wanted to know that because I'm really curious about the crossover, right? Because you mentioned Megan sees all ages, and all three of us are in the age range of the perimenopausal world. And a lot of our listeners are in that age range and may have teens and young athletes or like kids who are going to move into that stage. And we're talking prevention. But, people might be hearing things that they're like, oh, I wonder if this applies to me. How does this apply to me as a woman who's, maybe had kids or not, and it's still staying active and still wanting to do right by themselves and their kids and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious about, obviously we know Katherine's background is pediatric. So the only thing you can really speak to is like your own personal experience with like credentialed expertise, right? But I'm curious about, maybe Megan, start with your take on REDS when it comes to the 30 and 40 age group?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, first, we don't have a ton of research
Right.
around prevalence of REDS or how REDS shows up in midlife. We have more research on eating disorders in midlife, and there is such a substantial overlap. But I can say also, just kind of anecdotally and professionally, what happens a lot is that people begin to experience the body changes that come with perimenopause. And then all of the messaging that they get is basically, what can I do to walk that back? What can I do to bring weight back down, body fat back down? Sometimes it's maybe motivated by cholesterol going up or something like that, some other kind of hormone driven change. And there's really no one in their life in terms of, often their primary care doc or even friends in their peer group who is going to tell them that that's a bad idea to cut out foods or food groups or attempt to lose weight or pick up weight training, but also keep the cardio high and try gluten-free, try veganism, whatever the case may be. It's just so widely accepted to begin to restrict basically in order to manage or try to manage some of the body changes. Even going on microdosing GLPs seems to be like a big thing that is now marketed to women in midlife. And they're not even often at the place where they understand why the body changes are happening. They just know that their bodies are changing and it needs to be fixed, is what they think. So we get a lot of those folks that have REDS or they have low energy availability because they're training harder perhaps than they ever have in some cases. They're eating very little and their body still isn't changing and it's frustrating them. And somebody might turn them on to the idea that they're under fueling, or at least maybe they have the desire to just fuel differently. They're wondering why it isn't quote unquote working. And that's how they end up with us in our care. And that's a very
Yeah.
common scenario. Endurance athletes, especially who are training for ultras and doing, long distance events, their bodies change in a way that feels like it's happened overnight. And yet they're very consistent with training and eating, and it's hard on them. So
Yeah.
we're seeing a quite a few of those folks coming through.
Yeah, well, I can resonate. I mean, I personally, I kind of clued into this as, and I looked at the research. I was like, there's no research. There's nobody really out there in the perimenopausal space, in the perimenopausal athletic space, even talking about, oh, wait, hold on. There might be a REDS issue here, or there could potentially be one. And I clued into it on myself first because not even intending, I just didn't wake up one day, but it was sort of like, hold on. I am seeing these sort of energy patterns and like feeling stressed in my body and feeling tired when I shouldn't be and not recovering from exercise the way I want. And while I do believe that my hormones are driving a lot of that, obviously, and know they are, and I've been doing things to help with that directly, like hormone replacement, I was like, you know what? I think that there's an issue here in underfueling unintentionally, like just kind of following the general advice out there to eat as much protein as I possibly can, like making it a part-time job to eat protein. And, I sort of went the functional medicine route for several years while I personally was recovering from cancer, which I think was helpful. But a lot of the messaging, for better or worse, from that route, sometimes nutrition wise, is like, watch your carbohydrate intake because that's going to do blah, 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 blah to your blood sugar. And that works for some people, but maybe not for super active athletic people, which I am. And I just kind of one day was like, girl, you studied REDS for so many years and you probably have walked yourself into this without realizing it, and made a really concerted decision a year ago to like not cut back on exercise, but just take a look at the intensity and modulate it a little more, build in more recovery, and eat more carbs. Like I was like, let's just see what happens. And it took a while, the whole renourishing, like you said, but it took slowly. I was like, oh yeah, I feel so much better. So much
Amazing,
better.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it affected my sleep. That was the first thing. Like I was no longer like feeling hungry at 3 a.m., which is such a common thing women talk about at this age and stage. And waking up with the racing thoughts at 3 a.m., I was like, oh, crazy. Eat some carbs, And that's oversimplifying, obviously, I know, but it's just, that's what clued me into it and wanted to talk to y'all about it. And I think that from the medical side of things, what I hear my friends going through, they're going to their physicians, whether it's a OB-GYN or someone who's prescribing hormone replacement or that kind of stuff. And it's very well-meaning in it, but I think that there's a missing piece for looking at the athlete. Katherine, I wonder your take on that. Like, obviously your world's pediatrics, but just as a human in the medical world who sees this stuff happening too.
100%. And I can't tell you how many people I know who have, are in this perimenopausal bracket and may also be very active and maybe also have a component of REDS. And the symptoms just overlap so much that it can be really challenging to tease apart. Are my periods irregular because I'm in perimenopause, or are my periods irregular because I'm in a state of energy deficiency, or both, right? It can be really challenging to tease apart. And unfortunately, most medical providers out there are not well versed really in either, but it tends to be, if you see an OBGYN, they might know something about perimenopause. They may not know something about REDS, and they may not take into account somebody who's very active. And so when I see, all this advice on social media about, you have to eat your body weight in protein a day and cottage cheese and weighted vests, it's like an oversimplification. But I guess my advice would be, it doesn't matter whether you're a 15-year-old active person or a 45-year-old active person, you need to fuel your body appropriately. And that includes all different kinds of foods. That includes carbohydrates, which are your primary fuel source when you are active, as well as your primary fuel source for your brain. You need protein too, but you don't need to eat these bucket loads of cottage cheese all day that social media makes you think you do, So I think just giving women of this age group permission that you do need to fuel your body just the same way your adolescent athlete is needing to fuel their body, right? Like, your body still needs food. So, and I know hormones change and bodies change, and moving more towards a place of body acceptance. And that's also a really good role modeling for those folks who do have children and do have adolescents, is to be able to work on accepting your own body first. And that will also be such a great message for your kids as well.
That is such an important point of body acceptance in perimenopause, which again, I can speak to. I mean, especially coming from swimming as our background, where you're in a swimsuit, everyone's looking at your body. And you guys know the research says that those thinness and sort of aesthetic sports are going to be more inclined to eating disorders and REDS and all the things. There's so many correlations that have been shown in the research. And I think that when we take that, obviously there's not research on women in perimenopause and, that as it pertains to REDS. But if we were to take it and kind of extrapolate out and go, well, yeah, okay, there's all this body change that's happening. And it feels like you're out of control, going back to that endurance athlete who, trains and trains and trains and trains, ultra marathoner. And suddenly her body starts changing and she's like, wait a minute, I didn't change anything, and feels like she's losing control. And then it's very hard as a woman in our society to exist in a vacuum where you don't feel like someone's looking at your body objectively, or you're looking at it and you're worried what it looks like, right? As it changes, whether you have a body image issue or not, right? Like, it's sort of like, it just happens. We can't not feel that and think that. So I think it's really difficult to feel and sense those changes and not feel like you're failing somehow, or there's something you need to change or restrict, or you need to train harder, which then of course can set you up for REDS and or just stress on your ovarian function, which obviously sets you up for REDS. I think that to Katherine, your point, like, are my periods irregular because it's perimenopause, or is it REDS? I wonder if, a message that I would love for someone to do research around, which would be so hard to do, is like, what if it's both?
How do they interact? How do they
interact?
Injuries, fatigue, iron deficiency. There are so many shared symptoms. Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't remember which one of you said, but kind of the prevailing symptom of, I think it was you, Megan, like cholesterol changing, and the narrative around cholesterol, like, don't eat fat, and
weight loss is centered on
weight loss.
Yeah. It's that is one of my favorite fun facts to share with the folks who I see in midlife who might come in because their LDL is trending up and their doctor's concerned about it and has sent them a handout on a heart healthy, lower calorie diet. We can move that needle with LDL in the absence of any weight changes. We don't have to target weight loss. We can make some tweaks to the diet and even the movement to bring that down without needing to center weight loss or pursue weight loss. And I think that blows their mind because they think of those things as really needing to be paired together. I have to lose weight in order to get my cholesterol down. But there are plenty of folks who live in smaller bodies with very high cholesterol. So yeah, it's interesting what brings people in. And oftentimes we are able to see improvement in those markers without them having to shrink their bodies.
Amazing.
And I also wanted to echo off of that a lot of times when somebody is in a state of REDS or energy deficiency, that by itself can cause cholesterol, right? So you may have somebody who's in a state of REDS who's being told by their medical provider, you need to lose weight, when actually that's the opposite of what they need to do, right? So it can be, there's just so many different factors here. It's such a complex situation that each individual needs to be looked at by somebody who can understand both of these worlds.
Yeah. Love this. Love this. I'm curious for our age group. We grew up through the 90s and early 2000s, which was like the low fat era. Everything was low fat. And then it sort of shifted into low carb, keto as sort of queen of the diet culture. And then now we're in protein is queen. Katherine, I love the image of bucketfuls of cottage cheese, first of all. Gross. Also, but it's true. I mean, there's just, I feel like it happens to every generation, but our generation is, especially with the internet, there's just so much access to misinformation or what's right, what's wrong. Obviously, it's complicated, but, I think that maybe my question is centered around, let's imagine, I'm just going to think of a friend of mine and use her as almost an avatar, like a 38-year-old active endurance sport, right? So she runs, she bikes, she even swims sometimes, and, just loves to be outside, very, very, very active. And her periods have started to get irregular. And she's literally doing something every day of the week for at least an hour to 2 hours, high intensity. She's weight training. She's also doing CrossFit because she knows she needs to build muscle. So, for her periods have started to get irregular. She started to show signs of depression. Her sleep is off. She's constantly anxious. And, she goes to see her, I think it's a functional medicine provider who's like, okay, we're going to do a hormone panel. We're going to check your thyroid. And they're like, yeah, I think you're in perimenopause. Here's what you need to do. And they don't give her the right nutrition advice. So what would that type of athlete who isn't meaning to maybe under fuel, like she's eating pizza, she's going, like she's not restricting necessarily, but still might not be getting adequate fuel. What would we want to tell her to maybe ask about, or who to see other than you? Obviously she should see you.
Me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess first, I always find it a little bit concerning when someone in that bracket goes to see their PCP and they make a judgment around the state of nourishment of a person without really doing anything to evaluate whether or not they're adequately fueling or eating. It could even be a simple question of like, what do you eat on a typical day? And oftentimes those questions aren't even asked. Or how much activity are you doing? Do you feel like you're able to meet the demands of training? Are you hungry? Are you having regular bowel movements? Those questions often aren't even asked in those environments. They're just using the weight as a metric. That often is kind of that is telling their PCP everything their PCP thinks they need to know about the person's state of nutrition. Whereas that weight is really probably one of the least compelling factors for the folks that we tend to see. It doesn't tell us anything about their nutrition status at all. So I think the first thing to do would be to just recognize the limitations of some of the providers out there in terms of their scope of expertise. They're really good at doing certain things that others maybe struggle with, but they might not recognize, they don't have training usually in nutrition. They may not, again, know what REDS is, or they may not really understand how to assess for undernutrition properly. So first things first, I would see someone with expertise in evaluating adequacy of nutrition. Usually that would be a dietitian, but that would be a good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally hear you on that. Like, it's sort of like, especially with the women in our age group, it's like to the point of your body's changing and you might be like storing more fat in places you never did before. And so, and you're quite active and you're still training and haven't changed anything. And so I could see on the surface that it's like, well, this person's from a weight perspective looks like they're well nourished, like looks like it.
Looks.
And look, they're very active, so they must have plenty of energy. No one's going, maybe there's an underfueling thing going on here, unintentional, right?
Yeah.
And so they kind of might get tossed around even when they're like, I'm still tired, or I'm not feeling great, or I'm depressed, or just my moods are off. And I feel like that parallels quite a bit with young athletes as well. At least I saw that. Katherine, I'm curious about like those sort of less obvious symptoms of RED-S that might get missed in a young athlete as well.
Yes. And one of the tricky things about RED-S is that the symptoms are often vague. And, fatigue, I would say, is a very prominent symptom that we commonly see, or decreased performance athletically, decreased recovery. But you touched on earlier personality changes, mood changes. Somebody who's a straight A student, they may still be a straight A student, but they're having issues with concentration. They're having issues getting stuff in their brain. Their parents may notice, wow, my kid doesn't seem like my kid lately. There's been a change there. And so oftentimes parents will get sort of a spidey sense. So like something is off. And often the kid is getting this as well, but they, sometimes these symptoms are so vague that they think it's just that I'm training a lot, right? Of course I'm going to be tired. I'm swimming 24 hours a week or whatever it is they're doing. And, but then going to school and, right, and having homework on top of it. So of course I'm tired. And so it can be really challenging to tease apart, is this sort of normal expected levels of fatigue, or is there something more going on here? And it is just so common in young athletes, especially those who are in these high energy needs sports, like you're swimming, like you're running, soccer, etc., that it should be something every sports parent and every teen athlete is aware of, just so if there's any concern, they can go and get it checked out. Injuries of any kind, I know we often talk about bone stress injuries as being a prominent sign, but, in people who are doing swimming, for instance, they're not doing a lot of weight bearing, they may not have a stress fracture, but they might get, shoulder injuries or overuse injuries, which can be a sign of burnout as well, which I know, Julie, but yeah, I think anytime somebody is having a change in their overall energy, their ability to train, their ability to perform, and certainly in young women, any sort of menstrual regularity in young men or men in general, we don't ask enough about their sexual function, right? And are they getting morning erections, and do they have libidos? And that's often what leads the men to presenting care, but we just don't ask about it. And these young men may not know what RED-S is and may not know what to do about it, and just be worried about it, but don't feel comfortable talking to anybody about it. So yeah, I mean, there's a multitude of symptoms. RED-S can literally affect every organ system in the body, and for everybody there's different flavors of how it tends to present, but that's kind of an overview of the most common things we see.
Thank you for mentioning men, by the way. And I think that's we're talking about body image in women and women in perimenopause, but I think that it is so underrated how much RED-S affects men.
Yes.
For all the reasons you mentioned. And I love that you mentioned sometimes the thing that brings them in is the sexual function, and I hope that it can continue through your work, and other people who are in this field can continue to raise awareness that this affects men and boys as well. Yeah.
100%.
One addition here that I'll plug in case we have any parents of boys listening. Oftentimes they have low testosterone or low ferritin, but they don't know it because kids, needle phobic. They certainly don't want to go and get blood work just for funsies unless they have to, right? Not something they routinely do. A lot of the 13-year-olds we see, for example, can't remember the last time they've had blood work. Maybe they had it when they were hospitalized for pneumonia or something like that. So the plug that I'll make is that if you're concerned at all about reds or underfueling and you have some blood work coming up with your kiddo, try to add on a ferritin and get their testosterone checked just while you're already getting blood taken, because they're not routinely checked. And that might be the thing that flags in a young male athlete. We just often don't have that data. So they just come in because they're tired, or maybe they are having like a decrease in morning erections, but who's asking them about that? Probably not their
Yeah.
parents. Like even I cringe quite a bit. I tend to avoid these kinds of questions in our sessions. And so, oftentimes they come in when they're really out of gas, they're injured, they're tired, they're hurting. And we could have gotten in front of that, but we don't have the data yet.
Gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
What that is its own niche, like boys and reds and low energy availability. Yeah. We need like someone to spearhead that and just go with it.
I mean, I would say about a third to 40% of our patient population are male to the door. And that was consistent with what we were seeing in our eating disorder practices as well, which I think a lot of people don't realize. And unfortunately, there's still the stigma that boys and men do feel about seeking care for RED, seeking care for eating disorder. I had a young male tell me that his coach had never, in 30 years of coaching cross country, ever had an athlete with REDs. I said, that is not true at all. Your coach just isn't informed about REDs, and it's not their fault. They just never were educated on it. It's a really new framework for looking at things, but these athletes, especially these male athletes, can feel very alone. They feel like they're the only ones struggling, and it's just absolutely not true. So many men out there and boys struggling with REDs.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that out there, that it's just so common in really every population, every sport, even people who aren't athletes. You're people who are going doing Orange Theory or CrossFit. You are an athlete. You may not call yourself an athlete or consider yourself to be one. But if you really are an active person, then you are an athlete and you should be eating like one.
You are an athlete and you should be eating like one. Great advice. I mean, and I feel like there's so much permission there. I was just thinking about kind of drawing it back to the adult crowd, but this is really hitting teens as well, is the wellness, clean eating culture of, almost like everything's got to be too organic and super like unprocessed. And I feel like there's this, it can be difficult for your ambitious athlete type, whether it's an adult or a teen who wants to do the right thing, who genuinely cares about doing healthy things for themselves, to eat enough when you're like, well, it's got to be organic. We bring in supplements into this part where, people might be taking supplements or protein powders and things like that when they're not actually getting enough calories. I'm curious your take on that, sort of the wellness optimization, like keep it clean, keep it organic, make sure you get all this stuff without the emphasis on make sure you get enough to eat also.
I'm so glad you brought this up. I would say, Megan can correct me if I'm wrong, this is probably the number one way that somebody kind of gets down the road for having REDs or an eating disorder. And it always starts with really good intentions. These are people who want to do the best thing for themselves. They want to perform well. They want to be healthy. And it doesn't matter how old you are, like you can eat too healthy, right? Especially if you're a very active person. It just makes it so hard to get in your nutritional needs if you're just eating kale, right? You really do need to eat some higher caloric density foods. And I know there's this whole push against processed foods, etc. There is a time and a place, especially for an athlete, to be able to get in a wide variety of foods. And yes, that includes ice cream. And yes, it includes hamburgers, right? Basically, all food should be able to fit as part of an active person's diet. And actually today I saw a social media influencer who said something. It said, after 40, here are 5 food groups I'm cutting out, or something like that. It's like, I'm cutting out sugar, I'm cutting out carbs, I'm cutting out artificial sweeteners, and I forget all of them. But No, you don't need to cut anything out. It doesn't matter what your age. If you're an active person, you absolutely can and should be eating all sorts of different foods.
Yes.
It really is what I consider to be the most healthy kind of diet, because healthy also includes like enjoyment of life too.
Enjoying.
Yeah, enjoying food. Yeah, it's part of life.
Pleasure.
100%.
I know. The Europeans have got it right with that one, like the slow eating and the pleasure and like being in the experience of it. I love that so much. Yeah, Megan, I'm curious your take on that with wellness culture and
Yeah.
all of that.
You know, the wellness culture and the clean eating community and all of the messaging around that, I think that's often kind of the thing that one of the earliest predictors or the thing that drives people into need treatment. This goes for eating disorders as well, but certainly REDS. There's kind of a way of eating that is praised or seen as more wholesome or more aligned with what athletes should be eating. And oftentimes it's just not enough to meet their needs. It's not enough to meet the demands of daily living, let alone all the training that they're doing. Again, there are very few people in their lives who are going to tell them that and who are going to do anything but, like, the weight loss is praised, the body changes are praised, the way that they're eating they may be given a lot of attention for that, and it may be kind of unintentionally reinforced. But oftentimes, like, that's kind of the early sign or the early behavior change that results in the underfueling and then all of the consequences downstream. So it's as much as I love nutrition and I love talking about food and thinking about food and all of the thinking of food as medicine and the wonderful things that it does, the messaging has always been a little bit of it's just kind of a plague. It's one of those things that's always been bothersome and downright dangerous for the rest of us, like working in the nutrition field, that, really, really value being able to eat enough to meet needs and eat flexibly and maintain a quality of life. So yeah, complicated relationship with the wellness community, I'd say.
Yeah. I think of that statement for new moms, fed is best. That comes. Like, I feel like it applies with the active and athletic population too. There's a sports dietitian I follow on Instagram who she's got great messaging. And she like walked through Trader Joe's one day and was like, look, these are all processed foods. Yeah, absolutely. They're processed. But you know what? When you're an athlete, like, let me show you how this frozen spaghetti meal is actually exactly what you need. And you're in a hurry and you're a kid who's in high school and you have 30 minutes to eat dinner before you need to sit down and do your homework. This is why you need to buy, you don't have to buy this one, but like something like this for your kid is going to be a lot better than mom stressing over meal prep when she doesn't have time or energy. And like, then the kid doesn't get enough to eat. And it becomes a whole cascading thing where like nobody in the family is getting enough. I think that I loved that message because it was like there was such a permission there that you're not harming your kid, you're not going to harm yourself to get the fuel. Ideal world when you've got, extra time, sure, buy it from the farmer's market or sit down and make it. But, picking it up from McDonald's is probably going to be okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love the connection you shared with Fed is Best, especially my pediatric background. I think that's so great that somebody's going to be way more harmed by not getting in the nutrition they need than by eating processed foods here and again. So I think, I know most of the people listening probably want to follow a, quote, healthy diet and eat clean most of the time. And that's great. But you do need to make sure your needs are getting met. And sometimes, if you're a busy professional or you're a high school athlete who's going from class to practice and the only way you can get some food in between that is by bringing an energy bar, great. You know what I mean? That's way better to have some fuel in your body than none. And you're going to perform better and you're going to be healthier too.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of the folks that we see have kind of, they're feeling paralyzed by all of the information out there, and they just don't know what's left to eat that feels safe anymore. And even, add to that also, there's no agreed upon definition for processing of foods or processed foods, or I believe even ultra processed foods. So, when you see spinach, for example, all cut up, that's undergone some degree of processing as well. It's just that it's only spinach. So the messaging is confusing too. And I think it leads people to think that they can put foods in a category of good or bad and that that's enough, but it's really much more nuanced and complicated.
You're totally right about that. Oh man, we could do a whole other episode on good and bad food and all of that. I'm just thinking too about you've also got the gluten-free, dairy-free, everything free conversations. And sometimes that's really medically necessary for people. And sometimes it's more of a craze and a fad. And I used to joke, I went through those types of things for a while, medically recommended when I was going through my own medical stuff. And I remember being like, okay, so I can have cardboard and water, basically, is what you're saying,
Yeah.
And it felt really restrictive. There was a moment, I write about this so much, where I stood over the stove trying to make pancakes out of coconut flour and I was crying because they didn't work. It just wasn't pancakes. And I was so hungry. And I just at that moment was like, we're going to eat whatever the heck we want to eat. I don't care what it is, But it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is not going to work. Oh, it seems to be well-meaning advice that someone gave me, but it's not going to work for me. And I'm glad I had the wherewithal to push back on it, but I think that a lot of people, back to what we said earlier, that gets them down the road towards REDs or eating disorders is there's very good intentions, of wanting to do the right thing. And sometimes it backfires and you're crying over the stove, starving.
Thanks for sharing that story. And you're totally right. I think the people who are most set up for REDs are your overachiever types who are trying to do the right thing, right?
Absolutely. Well intentioned. Yeah.
If you kind of are following along with all the research that comes out, I mean, there's not really a food left that is totally not demonized in some way, aside from maybe protein right now. Protein is having a moment.
Having a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take all of that literally, there isn't any food. And it kind of goes back to, Hippocrates in ancient Greece, that everything in moderation. And I think it's simple and yet not in our society to live by that sort of philosophy. And it goes for exercise as well. Everything in moderation. You can't have too much of a good thing. You can have too little of a bad thing, but everything in moderation.
And I think for the athletic crowd, something that I remind myself, my husband, who's very active, he's an ultra endurance guy, the advice sometimes is not for us. That sort of general nutrition advice. It's actually not for us. It's not for people.
Landscape,
Yep.
different season of life. I often tell our patients, often what you're asked to do is not the thing that's best for you. And I try to get that kind of stuck in their head so that they can also kind of critically think about the asks that, what are providers asking them to do? What is their PCP asking them to do? Does that fit with what you know about yourself? No, it's okay to challenge these things. It's okay to ask questions because that messaging might not have been intended for you.
Yeah. 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 I feel like for women, bringing it back to women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, going through so many changes, who are active and very dedicated to being healthy and taking care of their bodies. That's not everyone, but there's a subset of the population, right? When you hear the advice to the generally perimenopausal woman who maybe isn't super active and super athletic, that's the same thing. That's where I woke up and was like, wait a minute, I think the advice I'm hearing is not for me. And I'm not actually sure who out there would give me the right advice, who can look at the intersections of my age, my stage, my athletics, and my own unique medical background. And I have my own team, but I feel like I have to piece together about 5 people. And then I'm still in the center of it, thankfully, with the vocabulary and the expertise and the knowledge to go. Still, you know what? I'm the one putting the food in my mouth and buying the food. So I've got to decide what's right. And I just don't think anyone's quite hitting it, for my unique background.
We often talk about how everybody in their family has, and even amongst a sports team, has different nutritional needs. Everybody has their unique needs. And you're absolutely right that if you're an athlete or you're a very active person, you should not follow the generic nutrition advice. It is not applicable to you. And oftentimes I'm seeing this in my pediatric population where I have a growing teen who not only are they doing their sport every single day for 3 hours, but they're also in a growth spurt, which requires a lot of energy, right? And it's just logistically hard for them to get enough food. even when they're trying to work on it. And everybody in that family, and compared to their non-athlete peers, they have very different nutritional needs, right? So I like to think of athletes and active people as being sort of a special population when it comes to nutrition. And I guess that's kind of at the root of why we wanted to start this, to be like really for this population of active people, of athletes, because they are different. They are very different than, the general population as a whole.
Yeah. I think of 15-year-old Julie who brought 2 lunches to school. And I was sneaking food during class the whole time because I was so hungry. And it probably still wasn't enough, because we had 2 swim practices a day. It was so many hours. Plus studying, plus growth, like you said. And yeah, I saw another like sports dietitian recently talking about teenagers, Megan, who she showed like the amount of carbohydrate intake a growing teenage boy athlete needs to get in pieces of bread. She like stacked them up so you could actually see it. And it was wild. I don't remember how many pieces of bread it was, but it was like more than you would ever think. It was like a loaf of, or like multiple loaves of bread a day, basically, to like meet all the metabolic demands of this particular young athlete. And I just think that was such a great demonstration.
Yeah, it's helpful to put it in visual terms, I think, for people, just so they really can. Because it's one thing to say eat more, but the way that that's translated sometimes in the home doesn't quite cut it, understandably, because it isn't intuitive how high the needs of an athlete are, especially like you said, when they're developing and growing. And yeah.
And a lot of our athletes with Reds, they do eat, and everybody around them says like, oh yeah, they do eat, but they just don't necessarily realize how their energy needs are.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
worked with, when I was doing health coaching prior to all the other iterations of coaching I've done, my niche was young athletes with Reds. And I did a whole lot of intake questions. I wasn't really doing super nutrition coaching, but we talked about it a lot. And I usually partnered with a registered dietitian, but they would hesitate to almost, I don't know, like not admit it, but almost like want to get support, because they would say, she does eat. My daughter does eat. My son does eat plenty. Like they eat so much. And, yet, especially with young women and girls I was working with, their periods were irregular. They were getting overuse injuries, their performance was dropping. And it was really difficult to get through to both the parent and the teen or college age athlete that, yeah, but you need so much more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that they often compare themselves to peers or other people in the family. And we try to discourage them from doing that just because it's not always an appropriate benchmark, right? When their
Mhm.
needs may literally be 2 or 3 times that of mom or dad's, for
Mhm.
example, or even sibling to some degree. It can really get that high. So
Mhm.
it really isn't intuitive, and sometimes those visual prompts can be really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I once asked a swim team. I was talking to a swim team about nutrition, and I asked, give me a range of what you think your caloric needs are in a day. And I remember somebody raised their hand and said about 1,800 calories. Looking back, I think that's what Cosmo magazine used to tell us we need as
Yeah.
women, right? I'm sure this population may know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I think these athletes truly believe their caloric needs were 1,800 calories a day. And if an athlete truly ate 1,800 calories a day, especially if they're super active and maybe they're growing, right, that would be not even probably half of their nutritional needs as a swimmer. So, yeah, I think there's just often this disconnect between what somebody's body's needs truly are and what they're actually taking in, because they usually are eating. They're usually not trying to be restricted, but you couple on just a lot of activity and it can tip the balance in an unfavorable way.
Yeah.
I'd say, in fact, most of the youth athletes that we have with Reds, not considering the eating disorder population, let's say just with Reds, they, on average, tend to be eating between 2,000 and 2,500 calories a day, which no one would, intuitively think about that as being too low. But yet it is. They're having all of these consequences, and they are under fueling. And so assessment can be a little bit tricky. Yeah.
That is really tricky, especially because we're not talking about underfueling and therefore not surviving. Oh, there's no like failure to thrive situation going on here. It's really like in the context of athletics, you have to really look at the whole context and go, the amount of activity, the amount of energy burning that's happening brings in another variable that it's still not enough.
Still not enough. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking also as y'all were talking about that, about trackers, I'm just like looking at my Garmin.
Yeah.
And, so cool. Kids love to have trackers. You've got the Garmin, you've got the Oura Ring, you've got the Fitbit, all the things that technically tell you what your caloric needs are, right? Which I think is really interesting because they're worn by people who are active and athletic. And I remember like looking at what it told me my caloric needs were, and I was like, no, that's not correct. Again, thankfully I have some background in this, but I was like, oh my gosh, it's also not thinking, especially with young athletes, but I think also driven, ambitious women, we use our brains a lot. There's a whole lot of metabolic stuff that the Garmin's not going to measure,
Yeah.
and take into account.
Do you see people sometimes running into trouble when they get too reliant on a wearable? Do you see that quite commonly? And, I know people who say, oh, my exercise didn't count today because I didn't push start on my watch, right? It's like,
I know.
Exercise still counted.
Yeah.
But you can, I think especially this kind of phenotype of person that's very driven, very perfectionistic, if you're also taking the watch data a little too literally, it can become problematic. And just something for folks to be aware of, that for some people, it's a very positive addition to their life. And for others, it may not be the most helpful thing for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting piece of technology that both like connects people with their body and disconnects them at the same time, like in different ways, depending on like how rigidly the data are like interpreted. It's always so interesting to me because I had a kid recently tell me he's turning over about 1,400 calories a day from training. So in his mind, his understanding of that was where my needs are every day. This is what I need. I don't need more than that because this is all I'm doing in terms of my training, which is obviously not, incorrect, but double-edged sword. Yeah.
I love that paradox. It's both connecting us and disconnecting us from our bodies. Yeah. And to Catherine's point about that phenotype of the perfectionist, the driven person, that's my clientele throughout my whole career. It's obviously me, it's all of us, and we're all recovering from it in some way. I say it's like you need to be an A+ student you need to be an A+ student at getting C pluses. Like be really good at being a C student and like bring it down a notch and find that sort of messy middle of using data or doing the right things nutritionally and training wise, while also being in tune with your body and yourself and your identity and everything around you to make sure it actually fits you, the choices and decisions you're making. So I love that you guys are here for that.
Yeah.
For the athletes.
Exploration, not expectations, is like often where we start, just learning from the feedback our body is giving us before we start. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. So we could talk about this literally all day. Maybe one takeaway. I love the exploration part. For the woman between 30 and 50, whether it's her or she's wanting to steward her own kids, nieces, nephews, maybe she coaches athletes, all the things. For each of you, what would be like a takeaway or just like parting wisdom? And then we'll get into our lightning round, which is fun questions.
I'd say this is actually, there's evidence to support this, that if we talk about bodies, and it's not just somebody else's body or your body, but anybody's body, right? Like you don't necessarily have to be commenting on a specific person's body. That is associated with a higher risk of eating disorders. So as a general rule, I like to suggest that people are not commenting publicly on anybody's body, even if it's a compliment. And this is where oftentimes we see the other side of things, where maybe somebody loses a little weight and then they get complimented, and then they lose a little more weight, they get complimented even more. And it becomes something very dangerous.
Yes.
That's socially accepted and and yet this person is really struggling and really not in a great place. So as a general rule and take home, I would say, yeah, let's not comment on bodies.
Right. Yeah. Love that. Maybe we could just stop that right now. Thank you for that. Megan, what would be your parting wisdom?
Gosh, I think the thing, along these lines, I think I would say that you don't have to shrink your body to manage a lot of the symptoms that you're trying to manage, whether that be from perimenopause or in like a state of being postpartum after having kids. A lot of the complaints that people come in with, I think the blanket advice is that weight loss will help, losing weight will help, whether or not that's feasible or right for their bodies, but you don't have to shrink your body in order to address a lot of these symptoms. Yeah, there are other more freeing and life-giving ways to do that. And so ask someone, a trusted provider in your life, like what those are, or at least just kind of begin to learn about that if you can, begin to explore that.
Both pieces of advice are all like taking the emphasis off of the body,
It can wait.
Yep. And I love that because I'm thinking of anecdotally, like the very first time I remember from a coach, an emphasis on what I was eating and what bodies looked like was 10 years old. Right. And so I feel like for women, moms mostly listening to this and people who are shepherding the next generation, it's so important it's such a small but potent practice to like stop yourself on even the compliments, like you said, Katherine, and you don't have to shrink your body to feel how you want to feel. And I would like take that to also perform how you want to perform.
Yeah.
You could still be an amazing athlete and not look the way the magazine says you're supposed to look, or the wellness influencer says you're supposed to look.
Yeah. We do see body types at the highest level of sports and virtually every sport. So yeah, I think oftentimes there's genetic predispositions of ways people are meant to be, and it can be very hard to change that. So body acceptance, I think, is a better route to go.
Yeah.
Modify to something that's maybe a little bit on the dangerous side.
Yeah. And I feel like that also is such a beautiful invitation to ask yourself how you feel versus how you look. And so there's that beautiful inward, which is what we're all about here, is going inward, like sinking in. That's why it's called sink and swim, to really like listen to your body, and go, wait, hold on. What do I actually feel versus what am I, even like taking it off the performance a little bit? Like, how am I performing? It's like, am I feeling good? Am I feeling energized? Because I feel like performance itself can be a slippery slope to, well, how do I micromanage all the things I do so I can get this metric or this time or this score or whatever it is? And that gets to be the secondary effect to how you feel, bringing it all the way back to what Kelsey said first, which was like, you don't have to sacrifice what's good for your overall health for your athleticism, which I think is so beautiful. Yeah. So much we could say, but let's get into the lightning round, which are our fun questions. And then we will send you guys on your way. Sound good? All right. Question number 1. We'll start with Megan. And you give me your gut here.
Okay.
If you could be any animal other than a human, what would it be and why?
The first thing that came to mind was a bird, because I've just been thinking recently about how beautiful they look when they fly and how freeing that must be to be able to go anywhere they want via air.
Anywhere, right? Yeah. A bird. What about you, Katherine?
Be a dolphin. First of all, I love dolphins. They like to swim. They're friendly and intelligent, and I don't know. I've always thought they're cool animals.
I would pick a sea otter, so I'm with you on the swimming mammal.
I love them. They're so so fun.
Yes, so good. Okay, next question. If you could get a coffee or a drink with 2 people, dead or alive, who would they be? We'll start with you, Katherine.
I would say Paul McCartney.
Good one.
It's one. And gosh, maybe my one of my grandparents. I only was able to meet one of my grandparents, my mother's mom, and I didn't get a chance to meet my other 3. So I would say one of them. I would love to be able to pick their brain and see what they're truly like.
That would be so interesting. Yeah, for sure. What about you, Megan?
I would definitely, now that you bring that up, also say the grandparents, all four of mine are deceased, and I met 1, 2, 3 of the 4. So that's more than 2 people. My celebrity coffee date would be Steve Jobs. I've always been fascinated by him and kind of drawn to him. I know he was not regarded as the friendliest dude, so might be a bit of a dry, awkward experience, but I still find him fascinating, and I find that I resonate with a lot of the things that he's been, the quotes and phrases and behaviors that have been attributed to him. So I would go on the thinking of this from like the fun perspective. I would go Steve Jobs.
Nice. Yeah. I love that answer. We've got Steve Jobs, Paul McCartney, and mystery grandparents.
Yes. What about you?
I would go hands down Taylor Swift, no question. Oh gosh. And then number 2, the first person coming to mind is Michelle Obama.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Common answer on this podcast, but yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I have so many questions.
Steve Jobs, huh? I'm the first person to bring that one up.
We haven't had a Steve Jobs yet. Way to be yourself there. I really love that, though.
Oh, that's Taylor Swift.
Yeah. All right, next question. Little bit of a pivot. Megan, does pineapple belong on pizza?
Yes. Yes.
Katherine?
100%. It's one of my
favorites.
This is a very polarizing question, but we're all 3 yeses on this one here. Yeah. People are either strongly for or strongly against pineapple on pizza. All right, number 4. I am a fly on the wall on an average Friday night at your house, Katherine. What do I see you doing?
Oh boy, this is a little embarrassing. And less so me, but we got a little karaoke machine for Christmas.
Yes.
And my kids all love to sing, and so sometimes we'll have like karaoke dance parties.
Yes.
Nobody else is invited to, but they're super fun. It's a super fun way to kind of wind down the week as a family.
Mm-hmm. What happens at Family Friday karaoke at your house stays at Family Friday karaoke. I love this.
Yes, exactly.
How about you, Megan?
Gosh, at least once it's dark outside, we'd be probably making pizza, parents maybe having a glass of wine, and then settling in for a movie.
Love it.
Yeah. Everyone in pajamas, probably past 6 p.m. So, yeah.
Love it. Pizza, making pizza. We've had a couple making pizza on Fridays. That's
I think it's a thing.
A nice ritual. Our ritual, for the most part, every Friday, we've got a local little bakery cafe that does like an elegant, not expensive, but elegant dinner. The chef makes like this amazing menu. So we'll go Friday night to do that. And then we come home and usually it's Netflix, couch, pajamas. Yeah. Super chill.
Perfect.
Yep. All right. Last question. We will start with Megan. What is a hidden pleasure or obsession of yours that people might find surprising, weird, quirky, or questionable?
Well, there's a long list. I have to think of the one that I am willing to share here. I guess documentaries. Most people that know me know that I have like an affinity for documentaries, and I don't know that there's one on Netflix or whatever that I haven't seen. It's like a preferred way of learning for me almost.
Yeah.
Not much of a textbook individual, especially beyond my school years, but I really, really enjoyed documentaries of all sorts, all types, all genres.
Oof.
And live music, but
yeah,
like live music. Yeah.
Live music and documentaries. I love the storytelling in documentaries. I feel like it's really, really compelling to me. I can get on board with that. Okay. How about you, Katherine?
I would say a bit of a child at heart, which I think is why I was drawn to pediatrics. And so I kind of love going to like water parks with my kids or, all things Disney or anything where there's a lot of children. I just think, I like to kind of get into that. I'm taking my kids to the Great Wolf Lodge in a couple days. And most parents, I think, are like, oh no. But I actually kind of secretly love it because it's just a bunch of children having fun everywhere. And I kind of can get into it too.
That sounds really fun. Really, really fun. A child at heart. Perfect fit for pediatrics. I hear you on that.
Yeah.
Okay, for me, it would be reading maps, looking at maps. I could stare at maps for hours and hours and hours. And I feel like maps just kind of tell us a lot about our culture, but also like the history of the earth and all kinds of things. So it's like storytelling, but in map form. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you both so much for bringing so much beautiful expertise and wisdom and, practical guidance and down to earth guidance that helps, active and athletic people see that there's something really unique and special about them and that they deserve really unique and special guidance on how to be as healthy and happy as possible in both their lives and in their athletic as well. So thank you for your work, and I hope it continues to grow according to your North Star.
Thank you. Yeah, very much for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. And what are the best ways for people to get in touch with you guys? I'll put them in the show notes so you don't have to give too many details.
Probably our website, which is a little bit of a funny spelling, but it's www.at.
Yeah, for people listening, it's EAT, like eat as in eat food instead of athlete ETE. Yeah, I love that. Play on words. Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, is the eat.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. So good. I love really thoughtful and clever branding, and y'all's has done a really nice job of that.
It's a labor of love.
I bet.
Wow, to land on it. But I've also always appreciated a good wordplay.
Me too. Yeah, for sure. Well, we will have to keep in touch and send people to learn more about y'all and keep an eye on what's happening next with you. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you again.